Before there were museums, there were the Muses. In Greek mythology, the Muses were the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. Memory and power. From their union came 9 daughters, protectors of poetry, music, history, astronomy, tragedy, dance. Calliope, voice of epic poetry. Clio, guardian of history. Urania, watcher of the stars. Terpsichore, spirit of dance. They were the source of inspiration for poets, thinkers, and dreamers. According to ancient writers like Hesiod, the Muses were created for a profound purpose: to relieve the sorrows of the world, so that even those burdened with grief might forget their pain. They gave humans song, they gave us story, they gave us a way to remember. And from their name, Mouseion, the place of the Muses, we get our word museum. The first great museum was not a building of glass cases. It was a sanctuary of thought. In the 3rd century BCE, in the city of Alexandria, rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty created the Mouseion of Alexandria, a temple to the Muses, and a state-sponsored community of scholars. Within the same royal complex stood the legendary Library of Alexandria, a vast treasury of scrolls. The ambition was staggering: to gather every book in the known world. Ships entering the harbor were searched for manuscripts. Texts were copied. Knowledge was accumulated. A Mouseion was not a warehouse of objects. It was a place devoted to inspiration, a community dedicated to study, writing, and discovery. Scholars lived there. They studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, poetry. Euclid wrote of geometry. Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the earth with shadows and mathematics. The Mouseion was not about display. It was about gathering the knowledge of the world in one place, an act of defiance against forgetting. Centuries passed, empires fell, and in Renaissance Europe something new appeared: the Cabinet of Curiosities. Known in German as the Wunderkammer, the Wonder Room, princes and scholars collected fossils, seashells, strange animals, mechanical devices, ancient coins, fragments of distant civilizations. A narwhal tusk displayed as a unicorn horn. A preserved crocodile hanging from a ceiling beam. Strange instruments whose purpose was half science, half magic. These were not yet public museums. They were private theaters of the world. A way of saying, look how vast creation is. Look how strange. Look how beautiful. It was an attempt to gather the universe into a single room. By the 18th century, something radical happened. During the French Revolution, royal collections were declared the property of the people. In 1793, the Louvre opened its doors, not as a palace, but as a public museum. The King's Palace became the People's Archive. Soon, institutions like the British Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art followed. The museum became democratic, at least in theory. A place where memory belonged not to rulers, but to the public. But the modern museum was also born in the age of empire. It carried the marks of colonialism, of expansion, of selection. Museums preserved, but they also selected. They decided what was worth saving and what could be left behind. We do not truly own the treasures inside museums. The sculptures, the manuscripts, the masks, the fragments of temples and tombs. They were not made for us. They were made for gods, for ancestors, for communities, for daily life, for love, for grief. We are not their owners. We are their temporary stewards, caretakers standing briefly between past and future. Even the word curator comes from the Latin cura, to care. A museum is not simply a collection. It's an act of care. Every generation inherits what the world has left behind, and every generation must decide whether to protect it or let it disappear. Memory is fragile. Libraries burn, temples collapse, languages vanish. Entire civilizations survive only in fragments. From plants, we learn to make paper. We write, and a voice from thousands of years ago speaks inside our own minds. There's an old African proverb: when an old person dies, a library burns. When you walk through a museum, you are walking through someone else's memory. And one day, we too will be memory. The question is not whether history survives. The question is whether we care enough to protect it. The word museum still carries its origin within it, a house of the Muses, a temple to memory. Built on an ancient belief that humans cannot live without remembering. That art, history, science, and story are not luxuries. They are relief from sorrow and comfort in a troubled world. And every museum at its best is an act of resistance against oblivion. Because civilizations fall, empires collapse. But as long as we gather what we have made, as long as we preserve what we have known, we insist, we were here, we thought, we felt, we created, we mattered.